gemensamt projekt för skolutveckling. Vi har lagt beslutsfattandet i skolfrågorna, inte som det traditionellt är i en utbildningsnämnd, vidare har vi haft tidigare och vi har kvar en utbildningsnämnd. Men själva beslutsfattandet i skolutvecklingsfrågorna har lagt direkt under kommunstyrelsen och också på högsta tjänstemannanivå när det gäller att utveckla skolan. För att visa allvaret i att det är en allvar med att vi vill förändra resultaten och resultatutvecklingen i vår skola. Det som vi konkret gör, det är att vi har startat ett stenvändarprojekt. Allt är tillåtet att titta på. Alla stenar ska vändas för att titta på hur skapar vi bättre förutsättningar för de som arbetar ute i klassrummet, de som är ute i skolan, att göra ett bra jobb och få resultat. Tanken är inte att vi i politiken ska gå in och peka i hur pedagogiken ska fungera och så vidare, utan vi ska skapa bra förutsättningar. Och då har vi 8 olika delprojekt där vi har väldigt olika stenar. Det är allt ifrån hur ser vår skolstruktur ut? Har vi rätt, är våra skolor på rätt plats? Har vi möjlighet att samla resurser och få rätt kompetenser? Till att se över utbildningen för nyanlända. Vi har ett boende för ensamkommande flyktingbarn. Exempelvis, hur gör vi för att de ska nå bra resultat även med en väldigt liten skolbakgrund? Vi tittar på stödet till elever som har särskilda behov. Vi tittar på ersättningsmodeller, givetvis, incitament och styrmodeller. Vi tittar på resultatuppföljning. Så att på det sättet har vi valt arbete. Jag tänkte jag skulle kommentera det sen lite senare också i seminariet efter att vi har lyssnat på Greg. Då är frågan, är tekniken klar?
Ja, du kan lämna över till Johannes.
Då lämnar jag till Johannes.
Ja, Johannes Hickman heter jag, jobbar som kommunikationsstrateg i Upplands Väsby. Och jag hjälper till med moderering här. Inte så mycket inledningsvis, för Greg kommer att hålla en dragning. Och sen efter det så har vi en dialog, både med Per-Erik och med er, runt det han har att berätta. Då kommer jag tillbaka igen. So, with those words in non-understandable language to you, Greg, I want to wish you a warm welcome, not only to Sweden, but to Väsby as well. And I suggest that you, and I know that you will give a little bit of background on yourself as well. So I will just hand over to you.
Sure.
Welcome.
Thank you. Hello everyone. Welcome and thanks for coming out this morning. So, super, thank you. So, thanks for coming. My name is Greg Butler and I'm the founder and a partner in an organisation called Collaborative Impact, which is a social innovation partnership. So we have 7 partners in 4 countries around the world, and our major focus is on education and looking at how we can bring together large multi-stakeholder partnerships to move ahead education agendas. And really what I want to talk to you today about is some of the work we're doing and maybe some of the relevance to the situations that you come from. So whether you work in a school or whether you work in a government or whether you work in a private sector organisation or whatever, I guess the point that I would start with is that education today is a challenge. I think it's been on the agenda a fair bit this week. Is that true? And I don't believe that one single organisation or one single sector has the ability to impact on the type of challenges we have in education. So it needs to be a community or a whole system-based approach rather than saying this is the problem of schools, or this is the problem of governments, or this is the problem of parents because they don't produce kids who are good enough nowadays and all of these things. So what we've got to do is say how do we work together to solve what is, I think, a real challenge and an important challenge. Because in a world that's changing rapidly, education is a pivotal thing. And I like to position it this way, that, today, my generation has produced some massive problems. Environmental, social, we could go on. And my generation doesn't have the solutions to those problems. So we're going to pass them on to the next generation. And if that generation isn't smart enough, if they can't think and operate at a level that's much higher than I'm operating at, then perhaps they don't have a great future. And I'm an optimist and I want them to have a great future. So I think that's an important reason why education becomes a fundamental as we start to think about the next generation and the next generation and the next generation after that. And so we've got to have education improve at the same level that business is improving and innovation is improving and technology is improving and all those things. Education has to shift to that same level. So just before I start a little bit, can you give me an indication if you're, just so I know who I'm talking to, so those people involved in education as a primary area? Those people involved in government? Those people involved in private sector? Civil society? Okay, good. So we've got a cross section which is really nice. And so if we can, I'm going to do a little dancing in the slide. So the challenge, and I just want to sort of put the challenge into a sort of context that's current and maybe has some relevance for the situation in Sweden. So the first thing about the challenge is this, that, if we can just advance the slide, the first thing about the challenge is this, that from an education perspective, we have a model in education that was built, not even in the 20th century, it was built in the 19th century, and fundamentally hasn't changed greatly. It's, yes, we've added a few computers, or we've reconfigured classrooms, or we've added bits to the curriculum, but fundamentally, if you look at it, it hasn't changed. In fact, one of the scary experiences for me sometimes is to go into a classroom and think, wow, this looks like it was when I was here. And it probably looks like it was pretty much generations before that. And so the signs that system is aging and getting to a point where the sort of big step change needs to happen is data like this. And this comes from a survey that was done in the US. And so you might say, well, that's no relevance to Europe. But there are similar surveys in Europe that show that this is the percentage of students who love school by grade. So when kindergartners come to school, generally they go, I love it. This is going to be a great experience. I can love meeting other kids, playing, learning. And by the time they get to the 9th grade, it's down to about 37% of kids who say, I love school. So if you're, as a society, happy to have 63% of kids who are saying, I hate this, or I really don't like this, or I'm bored, or it's not meeting my needs, then that's a dangerous situation for society, I think. And then there's a little bit of a step up, but I think that's more that kids can see the light at the end of the tunnel. So they go, I'm almost out of here, I'll fall in love again. If we want to move on, this is represented in another way when we start to look at what's happening from an employment, particularly youth employment point of view. And while this is data for the Eurozone, I think you can pull that apart in many ways. But while you might say, some of these southern European countries have big issues, I think Sweden's not inoculated against youth unemployment as a challenge. In fact, from the research that I've done, Sweden has quite high youth unemployment. And the challenge with youth unemployment is twofold. One is, some people say it's just to do with the bubble. The global economic crisis has caused a lot of youth unemployment. I actually think differently, and I think differently because there are a number of factors beyond that. And one of the factors is that while youth employment is probably at the highest levels for many years, at the same time, employers are saying, I can't find people with the skills I need for the jobs that will help me grow my business, that will help me be successful. And so we get this funny conundrum where, yes, thank you, Eva. So we get this funny conundrum where employers are saying, I can't find people, I'm looking for people, we have to retrain people when they come to the workplace. And there's a big mass of young people there who are keen and eager to get jobs, many of them even doing undergraduate degrees and coming out with undergraduate degrees and then finding that it's very hard to get a job. And so we've got to look at how we address that challenge. Just to give you a specific example of how that represents itself, I worked for a number of years in Microsoft, and Microsoft published a report in 2012, so it's 2 years ago they published the report, looking at the issue of their skills gap, their skills shortage that they had. So the two numbers here, 6,000 in 2012 was the number of vacant positions in Microsoft US out of a total workforce of 40,000, the number of vacant positions that they had advertised for and had not been able to fill. 6,000. So think about that. That's it's about a sixth of your workforce where you don't have someone there. And then the second number is the number of researchers and engineers that they can't fill in that same group. And the scary thing about these numbers are that it's not declining, it's in fact increasing. So this number in 2012 was a 36% increase over the previous year. So for a company like Microsoft, that's just one example, but I can go to lots of other examples if you want, local businesses in Sweden. And it's a similar story where people say, we could grow or we have jobs that are available, but we can't find young people with the skills to fill those. Of course, one of the mechanisms that's been addressed with in the past is immigration. So you just find people from other countries, and it doesn't work anymore. The immigration thing is not working because it's a global shortage, and so you're just stealing from someone else if you get an immigrant or bring someone into the country. So if we want to move on, I want to set this in context because I want to start saying that I think the fundamental problem is assessing and teaching the right skills is critical. This is a report card from when I was in third class. If you're very good with mathematics, you can work out my age and a whole set of things I've revealed here. However, I want you to look down here at the subjects that we did when I was in third class. And what we had then was a curriculum that was very focused, very rigid. In fact, at this time in Australia, on Tuesday, the 3rd of June, every teacher taught the same lesson. So you had a national curriculum. On those days, you had to teach this. Doesn't matter where the kids are at, you teach them. And it was focused on these sort of core basic skills, I'd say. And the focus of the curriculum was around compliance. And you can read it in comments. If you read my comments down here, it's all about, Greg's a little bit too much of a radical for the situation where we want kids to be compliant. That's the subtext, but they're putting it in nice language here. The other thing about it that I like is, look, we've got 3, this is literacy, those 5. This is the one I love. Just think about this, oral reading. I got 26 out of 40. Now, even if you're not a teacher, just think about that. How do you, not oral reading, sorry, silent reading. I got 36 out of 60. Silent reading. In fact, look, oral reading and silent reading, there was more weight put on silent reading. So, as a teacher or any adult, how would you measure silent reading? Think about it. He spoke while he was supposed to be silent reading. I mean, I still look as an educator. I spent, the bulk of my career as an educator in public schools. I still look at this and go, I have no idea how you measure silent reading. Apart from sit there quietly for an hour. And if you're absolutely quiet and you've got a book in front of you, then I guess I'll give you a high score. And what as a student or as a student or as a parent would I take away from that? I'd read this comment and go, oh, got to tighten him down a bit because he's not being compliant. So that's where we were in the 60s, and I think luckily for me I got through school and I was able to go on and I think have a pretty good career. This was really relevant for the time because that's what we were looking for. But today, are we looking for the same things? So if you go to employers today, you say you want compliant people who don't ask questions, do as they're told. No. What we want is almost the inverse of that. We want people who challenge, who have innovation as a concept, they're great team workers. These are the big shift. So none of this, there's no teaming here, or there's no, how did he work with other people? It's like, was he able to sit in the box? Okay, if we go on. So the question I'd ask you to think about is, today, in 2014, what is success in life and how does it differ from success in school? And this is, to me, a core challenge because what we're doing is we're producing kids who are successful in school, who then go to university quite often and are successful there, and then come out and go, hold on, I don't have a job or a career path ahead of me, and I've got to suddenly re-engineer or reinvent myself so that I'm going to be successful in life. And I think it would be much better if we said, how can we set kids up for success in life right from the day they start school? And I'm not saying put them on a career path or anything like that, I'm just saying, as a learner, what do I need? And I guess one of the core fundamentals of an education today is that you need to be a continual learner. I know in my life, I've had many careers. I keep swapping and changing, some of you probably agree. And in each of those times, I've had to go back and relearn new skills, new approaches, new ways of operating. And without that ability, what you end up being is locked into a box, and that box may disappear very quickly today, particularly if it's got skills that can be automated, can be eliminated with productivity gains and things like that. So let's move on again. So thinking about this question, we've been working on a global partnership. It's called New Pedagogies for Deep Learning. And I'll give you the public name, that's sort of the education name. And really, what we're saying is that education is at a major turning point. And 2013, 2014 are particularly interesting years because we're starting to see that people are rapidly going, we've got to change. We've got to make swift change. And we don't have time to wait. We can't do this in a 10-year window because in 10 years, there's millions of children who will go through school who won't have the opportunities they need for success. And the big thing about it is the bold bit here, to rethink pedagogical approaches and learning goals. Put bluntly, we need to rethink what it is we want kids to leave with, the learning goals, and how teaching and learning supports those. Because the sense of, a teacher, so if you just think back a little bit, when we had small schools in communities, and they were the hubs of information because we didn't have the internet or we didn't have digital information, the teacher's role was to be really a source of information. I have this information because I've done training, I share it with you, you take that forward. How relevant is that today? Who has a smartphone here? You don't need that model. So what we want to do is enable students to flourish. You like that word? Yes. Flourish. We want kids to flourish. And to do so, to be prepared to use learning to take action for positive change. So we're not saying we want kids to do well in school, we want kids to be able to flourish and then take action around these complex challenges, whether it's a personal challenge, community challenge, family challenge, or global challenge. Okay, let's move on and talk a little bit about how that's working. This is our line, this is our motto when we talk public. Kids can't wait. And if you think that you have years to think about how you're going to put change in place, you don't. Because kids can't wait. And increasingly they're getting frustrated with us as adults saying, fix it. Fix it. And so this is really important, I think. Yeah, let's go on. So, I said our work was called New Pedagogies for Deep Learning. People say, what is deep learning? Why deep learning? And why now? And I'd say because from history, just at a top level, from a history point of view, we built school as a shallow experience. By shallow, I mean we've built this curriculum that's very wide, very broad, but very shallow, increasingly shallow. And when it comes to the skills and competencies that we develop in that, they're generally memorisation, because when things are shallow, it's easy to memorise. But as it gets deeper and deeper, it becomes harder to memorise. You need to develop the competencies to be deep in those domains, to be able to take action. Okay, so let's look at that. What we're doing is we're looking at deep learning advancing all learners' capacity to flourish in a complex world. That's our goal. We're not going to be happy until we reach that goal. All learners. Let's move on. So, this is what we're doing. We have created a global innovation implementation partnership. There are some people who say we need to do more research. Really? You know, like we can keep researching forever and ever. We're of the mindset to say you take action and you learn from the action and you implement changes as you go. That's called innovation. I'll talk about how we're building innovation into the mechanism. Research is the type of research that will come from this is applied research. It comes from the learning that goes on. And we're mobilising proven new pedagogies. So we're looking at what are the new pedagogies, what are the new ways of teaching and learning, particularly in a digitally rich world. We all live in a digitally rich world now, correct? We're broadcasting this, it's digital, we've got computers, everyone's got their cell phones, blah, 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 blah. So, and change knowledge. So change knowledge means that I can go in Sweden today and I can find some excellent schools who are meeting the needs of kids. But they're not every school. So are you happy to have a society where we have such variance across the experience? We're not. Because what we want is every kid to have that same level of opportunity. So if that's the way you need to operate at the system level, one of my big arguments with education in the US is that they've got a broken system, so their way of fixing it is they create these things called charter schools. And what they are is schools outside the system that sometimes provide a good experience, but they're not mainstream. So we're saying we're happy for some kids to have a good experience, but not everyone. Let's tackle the real problem, which is change at a system level. And leveraging digital. Leveraging digital. So in other words, digital technologies provide us not only smartphones or computers or laptops, but they provide us with new ways to think, new ways to act, and new ways to address the challenges. And the interesting thing that we've noticed is that, we have lots of rhetoric around the digital generation and digital natives and all that. That's a lot of rhetoric. But what we're finding is that a lot of the young people in schools, not all, the majority of the young people in schools, are not just having devices, but their thought processes are being adjusted by them. Some of us go, that's really scary. If that's the case, take your glasses off, stop on, don't drive in a car, all of those things, because they've impacted the way we operate as well. But this thinking digitally and acting digitally is an interesting dimension. And what we want to do is enable deep learning and whole system transformation. And we're operating with 1,000 schools at the moment. This is our tip of the iceberg, 1,000 schools in 10 countries. And from the 1,000 schools, we want to diffuse that learning out to the next 1,000, to the next 1,000, to the next 1,000, till we start to have that tipping point.
Any schools in Sweden or Europe?
Not yet. Oh, in Europe, yes. Finland, Netherlands, and we're talking to Scotland, if you count Scotland in Europe. I don't want to get into that stuff. Okay, let's move on. These are my 7 rules of shallow versus deep learning, just to fill it out a little bit. And this is based on a wealth of research that's been done over 30 years. I'll give you the slides when you look at this stuff if you want. But Basically, what we need to do is move from the notion of push motivation. Some people call it extrinsic, but basically it's saying the reason you should work hard is because you'll do well on a test, because I give you a gold star, because whatever. What we need to do is shift from this push motivation to pull motivation. I want to do it because it's really interesting. I want to do it because it feeds my love of learning. I want to do it because I can make change. And what that does is it breeds deeper engagement. This is shallow engagement, deep engagement. We move from information recall. Okay, so today I'm going to give you something to read, tomorrow I'm going to test you on it, and we'll see if you remember it overnight. It's okay, the next day you can forget it anyway. So there was an interesting study done in the US again. University of Chicago looked at the amount of information that young people retain in their 13 years of school. What do you think? Pick a number. 7%. 7%. 93% out the window. You know? So what an inefficient system, isn't it? So information recall to competency development. Competency development being the knowledge, skills and attitudes so that you can apply them to complex problems and adapt to the problems that you're working with. Measuring what's easy. So today we measure what's easy. We say, let's give you a test and it'll give us an indication of how much you remember. What's harder is to say, let's look at how we measure whether you have the competencies that are going to allow you, set you up for life success, basically. To allow you to tackle a complex problem, to work collaboratively, to think critically, all of these things. So this is important. So, and shifting to measuring what we value. So going back to my equation, what are employers valuing at the moment? They want young people who are self-starters, who can solve complex problems, can work collectively in teams and collaboratively, who can communicate effectively, who have creative solutions, who have a strong ethical base. These are the things that people want. Bring entrepreneurialism to their way of operating. And they're the things we need to measure. And when we start measuring those, then the whole system will change. Because today, we get this rhetoric, sorry anyone in the political domain, but I'll pick on you for a little bit. We get this rhetoric which says, we know it's not working, let's keep doing the same. Or we know that measuring recall, putting kids on a bell curve, all of that doesn't work, but we'll keep doing it. So how do we shift? How do we get out of that thing? And I'll give you a hint, it takes risk. The ability to handle some risk. Innovation doesn't happen without risk. Neat thing. Educators have the answers to learning partnerships. And you're going to hear a lot if you're involved in education over the next 5 years about learning, the shift to learning partnerships. We define learning partnerships as the changing relationship between teachers and students, students and students, students and their families, students and their communities, teachers and teachers, teachers and school leaders. Because at all of those levels, if we operate in isolation, we won't be able to change the system. And even at the political level, we need more learning partnerships. And the difference between a learning partnership and, say, just a partnership is, it's built on the notion of we don't have the solution at the beginning. We have to work together to find out what the solution is. Standardisation and compliance. We want all kids to pass the same exams, to end up in the same situation, even though that doesn't serve our purposes, because we know that some will be creative, artistic, scientific, logical, analytical, to multiple paths for multiple learner destinations. In other words, there's a huge opportunity for divergence in education. It's the same thing that's happening everywhere else, you know. Does everyone want the same colour car, configured the same way? Or do you want, you know, the thing on the internet where you can order your shoes and they have your own colour scheme, etc. So this, again, I think for education as well. Learning at school, you know, the notion of learning in this 9 to 3 or whatever you operate in time frame, as opposed to life-wide learning. We talk about lifelong, most people understand that, but life-wide is the sense of in any day I've probably got about 18 hours when I can be learning. And kids get that, and what we want to do is tap into that. And Michael Fullen, who's one of the people who's working with us on the partnership, Michael's a well-known education leader globally, he has this throwaway line which I like. He says, you know, in the age of new pedagogies for deep learning, you get twice the learning at half the price. That's a good political line, isn't it? We're going to get twice the learning at half the price. And what he means is that if you tap into just the fact that kids want to be learning 15, 18 hours a day, and they've got digital tools that allow them to work in that, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you? Limited innovation, consistency, predictability, it operates the same way this year as it did last year, to the notion of constant and rapid innovation. In fact, in the schools we're working with, our 1,000 schools, we say in every teaching cycle being, 4 weeks to 8 weeks or something like that, there should be a review of what happens and then innovation. So changing constantly based on good data, good information, what works, what doesn't work. That's a nice framework to operate in. So let's move on and then say what might this look like. So I'm going to delve a little bit into educational aspects, and I'm going to do that on purpose because I think one of the other things I've seen is we have a shallow debate going at the moment. And the shallow debate goes, school served me, therefore it should be the same, or I went to school, therefore I know all about education. It's like saying I went to the doctor, so I know all about medicine, or I drove a car, so I know how to fix cars. All of these things are dangerous statements. And in education, what we need to do is have people who are more informed about what really are the big issues, what really matters in education. So I'm going to talk education speak a little bit too. If you don't understand anything, just go out and say, tell me what you want. Okay, let's move on. What might it look like? Our driving question in the work we're doing is this. How do we mobilise and foster new pedagogies for deep learning in all schools and systems through infusing the power of digital? That's what we're focusing on. Okay. So this is our innovation cycle. Our key thing says that we need to shift practice. We need to shift what happens today into a new form of doing. It should be based on research, but it isn't a theoretical thing, it's a practical thing. It's implementation, it's what's happening. And so we use this inquiry cycle, we call it the collaborative inquiry cycle, with all of the schools. And they're expected to go through this cycle, each teaching cycle, and it starts with, actually I'll go into it a little bit more. Key thing is this, if you use a cycle like this, change starts to happen on a 4-weekly basis, not on a 4-year basis. Change happens in a natural way because it's driven by what works and what doesn't work. You have to allow people to fail. And the important line today is fail quickly and learn and change. It's not like let's do a year and realise it didn't work and then try and fix it. It's like how can we learn from the doing? So let's move on, I'll go a little bit deeper on this. We've built a set of tools, a suite of tools to help these schools make change. We've built what we call learning conditions. In other words, the type of tools that allow a system leader may be a city, municipal leader for education, a school leader. We also include the cluster level there because we think schools naturally cluster, with the conditions and the measures of those conditions so that they can understand, do we have the right things in place? Do we have the right vision and goals? Do we have the right measurement? Do we have the right partnerships? Do we have the right resourcing allocations? All of those type of things. And we put those school leaders and system leaders into the same innovation cycle. So that's just not for teaching, it's to say, what are we going to change at the system level in a 3-month cycle? What happens? Did it work? Can we move on? We've built a set of tools to support changes in pedagogy. These are the tools that allow teachers to understand, do I have the right competencies? That then they have the type of scaffolding or support structures to enable them to rethink what learning might look like if I tap into the power of digital, if I tap into the power of learning partnerships, if I change the way learning environments work, and I focus on new pedagogical practices. And then we have, from a learning outcome point of view, we build a set of learning progressions. Learning progressions are the journeys that learners take in these set of competencies: critical thinking, collaboration, communication, creativity, citizenship and character. That collective set we call ethical entrepreneurialism.
Are all or some of these resources open?
Once we get them proven, so we're at the stage now where they're just being implemented first cycle, then we will make them available to every school, every city, every system in the world. Yes.
But right now they are under development.
Right now they're under development.
Okay.
And give us about 6 to 9 months and then you'll start to see them become available. Now we're also using digital as a way of managing that process. It's not a random process, and I'll talk a little bit about how that works. But just think of this. Let's go in and look at a couple of these just so you get an idea of what they might look like. So rubrics. Here's a fundamental thing. So in education, and I'm going to be a little bit cynical here, so I'm prefacing it, I'm going to be a little bit cynical. But in education, we've gone mad on accountability. In every system that I've ever worked in, I had anything to do with. So we say, we have all of these tests and measures and inspectors and blah, 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 so we get accountability. And yet we have systems that aren't delivering on the promise. Is the accountability working? Interesting question. So what we've done in education over the last 40 years particularly is to take a lot of the power away from the people who are doing the work, and we've shifted it to other people. So we have external measures, we have a lot of people who aren't required to make very deep decisions, the ones who are doing the work, and we get others who are telling them what they should be doing. Now, if you're in government, if you're in business, if you're in anything, that's a recipe for disaster. Because what you want to do is have the best decisions closest to the work. So what we're saying here is that when we get to deep learning, a lot of the decisions need to be made on professional judgment. Why does Finland do so well? Well, you know, that's a roaring debate. It's created an industry now because they have a sub-tourist industry called the visit to Finnish schools, you know, and do a tour. I believe part of it is that they have empowered their teachers to make professional judgments about learning more than other systems. So some people say there's an absence of testing, you know, like outside the school testing. I actually think they're allowing their teachers to make better professional judgments. And if you go to, say, systems like the UK, where, you know, when Tony Blair came in, he brought in something called the Literacy and Numeracy Hour. You will teach this on this day, and you will go through these 5 steps. There's no professional judgment. And what happened was it gave a little lift and then bed down. So if you want positive change over a long term, we've got to allow teachers to make decisions based on their professional ability. So what we've done is we've built these rubrics, as I said, that include things like this, and that's sort of what one looks like. Multiple dimensions, the type of indicators that we look for when you see these things happening that people can use, and then we're building behind that a digital system that captures that, and across the 1,000 schools we're working with at the moment, you can look and say, okay, who's doing a great job on creating a culture of learning? Let's look at what they're doing, can I learn from that? And do it in a way that's got similarity. Yeah.
So I'm thinking, how could we get this into a Swedish context? We have a quite rigid goal set by Skolverket and the steering documents.
Yeah.
Would this be an input to the political debate, or how this system could change? Or do you think we could apply these kind of rubrics, these kind of goals in a Swedish context as it stands right now?
I guess I'm going to answer that in a cynical way because you realize I'm a bit cynical, but is the current system working for you?
Some people think the goals are good, but the rest of the system is perhaps not so good.
I go back to my question, is the system working for you? So that's the bigger question. What we've done with our 100 schools and why we only started with 100 schools was to say, politically, are you willing to take the risk to allow 100 schools to work a little bit outside the system, to get away from the rigidity? And in the locations we've been able to work with, they've said yes. I would hope in Sweden you might find someone who would say, we're going to give the opportunity for 100 schools to be the innovators, the forefront. We can test using that methodology and look at the difference, look at the variance that you start to see in outcomes. So I think the whole model is built on innovation, and rigidity is not something that's very successful today, So maybe there's a flexibility that needs to be added into that. But this at the system level or at the school level is really good data to help us inform how I go through that innovation cycle. Okay, we've seen that we're very low on new measures and evaluation. What's in the next cycle? So assess where we're at, look at what we're going to do to implement change, do it, reflect and look at what worked, go back and start again. Okay, so let's move on to another one. This is our competency framework, and I just included this to provide a little bit of depth. So those competencies that I mentioned, and there's multiple dimensions across all of them, including leveraging digital in every one of them. So what we mean by that is that you can't be successful just on one dimension. You've got to look at all dimensions, and they range in different things. So like for character, it's learning to deep learn, grit, tenacity, perseverance and resilience, self-regulation and responsibility, empathy, and leveraging digital. And it's the art of teaching how you bring those things together. Okay? And then we've built these progressions as a way of shaping the journey, to help teachers understand where each student is on the journey, and then building learning activities and learning tasks that are aligned to where the students need to move on the next step. A lot of this is the shift away from production line teaching. I'm going to give you the same experience whether you're suitable for you, it meets your needs, whatever, just because it's easiest, to saying, we know where you are, we know your next step, how can we help you make that next step? But you've got to make the step. Okay, let's move on and look at what one of these progressions might look like. This is critical thinking. 2 dimensions of it, evaluating information and arguments, and making connections and identifying patterns. This is from limited evidence through to proficient, and so it starts to give the indicators. I know you can't read a lot of that, but if I was to say in limited for making connections, learners are able to see relatively simple patterns and connections, particularly when they're pointed out, through to learners are skilled in making learners are skilled in making connections, identifying patterns and seeing relationships. There's a level that sits under this I'll get to in a minute, but this map, when teachers see this, they go, wow, that really helps me start to understand how I take kids on a journey. Okay, let's move on. As I said, this collaborative inquiry cycle is the key. So let's move on again. We've put it at the whole system level, so it's a model that allows people to make change at the system level. They use it to assess, to design, to implement, and to measure reflective change. Continual innovation. This is not something that we made up. We stole this from the software industry, from the manufacturing industry, etc. Next one. It applies also at the, at the student learning level, the same thing. So we're using the same process, but now it applies to learning and how I design learning tasks, how I implement those and measure those. Let's move on. What comes from this is that we need assessments. And later today I'm talking more about this, but I'll give you a heads up. This is a collaborative assessment. You know PISA, the big thing that everyone's talking about? 2015 they're going to have collaborative assessments. Because the world is realising that measuring individuals doesn't cut it. We've been working on these assessments through something called the collaborative assessment lines. This is an example where you give 2 students in a browser half a problem each. And you say, you've got to solve the problem. And so they have to work together to share information, And what the software does is it sits behind it and then positions them back on the learning progression. So if you want to try it, there's one over in that way. We've got one working today. You can go test your collaborative skills if you're somewhere else. So collaborative assessment, move on if you can, Eva. This is the type of skills you start to measure. So we're not just, you think about a math test today. What's it measure? A concept, a singular domain, something like that. We're measuring very complex domains. And we're doing it in a way that's, kids go, wow, that was fun, I want to do it again. Can I go back and have another try? See if I can become a better collaborator. Next. We've built design, these are rubrics to help teachers design learning tasks that implement new pedagogies. So build on dimensions, things like learning partnerships, learning environments, pedagogical practices and leveraging visual as the fundamental building blocks. Eva, you want to move on? And there's a focus in learning partnerships in all of this. This is a critical piece. There's a OECD who does PISA also put out a report last week called TALIS, which is Teaching and Learning Survey, International Survey. In it, the key message was how important teachers see collaboration as being the fundamental shift that needs to happen. How they collaborate, how students collaborate, etc. We're a world that needs to work together. Let's look at an example of what that might look like. You need some... We'll pick it up. This is High Tech High in California. I'll walk you through it. Basically what they're saying is this is a school that's been built on the notion of the individual student being the one who drives what happens, where every student gets to decide what they're working on. They work on projects that are meaningful. The principal said you can walk into the school and ask any student what they're working on, what their next goal is, where they move on the progression. They can explain it to you in detail. Teachers don't do that, students do that. Where they're focusing on sort of real world problems that will address the issues. Here are some of the types of projects that they do. They're all the work is project based. And it's based around meaningful stuff. Here, kids in science are working on sequencing DNA. They're building DNA maps, and they're doing it to support the government in one of the African countries to track poachers. So they're looking at, in other words, they're not just doing it for study, their results will actually go there. And here's a picture you can see of an antelope's head cut off, which the kids are going, I feel like what I'm doing is meaningful. I'm really changing the world because I'm helping address a social problem. These kids are working with a community group who has problems with storage of their stuff, so they're designing storage solutions and how they're working with the community to make that work. Kids built this reader for a woman who had the disability where she couldn't work with text. And basically what he's saying is that he's never seen kids so engaged or motivated by the fact that they're helping people make those shifts. He's talking now about assessment, and basically they say they don't do any tests. What they do is they measure student progress totally on performance, on what kids can do, and that, I love his title by the way, and so they measure kids, and kids are involved in the measurement process. And measurement doesn't just happen at the end of learning, it happens every stage through learning. And so they've put in place the mechanisms to measure learning as they go. So that's just an example. High Tech High is a great example of one school. Well, there's actually 8 High Tech Highs in the US now, but they haven't been able to take it up to sister level. Great experience for those kids. What about the other kids? Our model is to take it to every student. Okay, let's move on, Eva, and finish up. I'll give you this slide, but basically it talks about what learning partnerships are. And we're doing that in a lot of detail so that people understand how learning partnerships work. And I'll give you that because there's a lot of words on it. But these things are important. Students have voice, agency, and contribution. And we have to get comfortable with that. We have to be comfortable with collaboration, with addressing significant challenges. Okay, Eva, we'll wrap up now. And so deep learning advancing all learners' ability to flourish. That's our goal. Where learning becomes ubiquitous and an integral part of life. So I'm going to wrap up now, and I think we're going to go to the points.
A round of applause, I think. Can I ask Per-Erik and also Eva, Peters from Microsoft to participate in front? And let's start by just having a short comment from both of you. Now, you've heard Greg before, but what are the from your perspective, what are the key challenges in sort of stepping into this type of into these solutions from a Swedish perspective and also from your sort of Microsoft perspective?
So I think that the lack of vision is a challenge for us. We need to know where we're headed, because otherwise we don't know how to carve out the way. And I think that Greg so gently put it, it's all about perseverance from our politicians that, get the vision in place and let the profession do their good job. So if there is something we should take with us from this session is the two things. If we can do that, we will go a long way on the road to actually have success. Of course, but also, as Greg said, they're in the system right now. So while grown-ups are failing, we're creating
Erik, from you told a little bit about the challenges or the projects and the things that Upplands Väsby has been doing in order to sort of address the challenge. What's your reflection after listening to them?
Actually, the thing that struck me most was one of the first slides. We had the kids who love school, and in 8th grade or 9th grade, it was as low as it can be. And I think that could actually be the scoreboard for our results in Upplands Väsby. It's exactly the same. We have high results in the beginning of the school, and then it's going down all the way. And maybe it's increasing a little bit in the end. And you said, what's it all about? You need to catch the interest for the students. And it's fun to go to school in the beginning, but somewhere in the end, it's not so fun because it's too shallow. You need to get deeper in. I think that's the real challenge for us in Sweden and in Upplands Väsby. And I think you have a lot of the answers in your project. So also I really like how you talked about the system and also the profession. And what I really also like is that you talked about month. You can create change not in 5 years or 7 years. You can create change in real time, here and now.
It's true. You can.
So, from the audience, you have any reflections or questions, please? And give us your name.
My name is Suzanne, and I work for a governmental agency, Swedish Council for Higher Education, and we work with partnerships in the educational area, but partnerships between internationally. But I have a question for you. The partnerships and the 1,000 schools that you have in the partnership, is it from preschool and up to high school, or is it only high school? I mean, what's the level?
We are operating with all levels, and what we've said is that a lot of projects still get hung up in focusing on curriculum or specific levels, but our fundamental premise is on pedagogies and deep learning, and that can apply to kindergartners as well as you know, the students who are in the last year of high school. In fact, it has implications for higher education as well, but we're not working there yet. And so I think the important thing to remember is, if we focus on the fundamental pieces that are most important, which for us are this shift from shallow to deep, and from old pedagogies to new pedagogies, then it applies everywhere. And that means you can take a system view. In fact, one of the things we've had quite often is that people have said, and this is I think a demonstration of an inability to handle risk, is they've said, well, could we provide schools where they only do it in one classroom? And our answer is no, you can't. Because you may change that classroom, but you haven't changed the school. Or you may change that school, but you haven't changed the system. And until we think systemically, then we're going to have this huge variance.
Just a follow-up. Do you evaluate, so you compare the schools, the 1,000 schools, and do they get to get the results from the comparison and the evaluation?
Yeah. So we have a live monitoring system. Talking now, broadly, I'm talking with my hands. We have a live monitoring system, and I think evaluation is a little bit of a loaded word. So we will do evaluation at points in time, but what we have is a live monitoring system. And the way that system works is that every teacher in those 1,000 schools, so we've calculated it's about between 20 and 30,000 teachers, is recording the learning progression data for the students they're working with at least 4 data points a year. So at least 2 cycles that they record, beginning of the cycle and end of the cycle. And then what they do is they're also recording the evidence of how they made those professional judgments. Did they use a test? Did they use observation? Did they use an interview, etc.? And so what we do is we're building probably one of the richest data sets in the world. Huge data set and very rich around the way that people are making professional judgments. And then we're building a triangulation model in there, so there's some validity, scientific validity in the data. And what we're doing, the model allows others to look at other people's data, so that it's not comparing in the sense of I want to create a list of the best schools and the worst school, but it's a comparability to say I'm focusing on character as a learning area. Who else is doing that, and what can I learn from them? They also record, each school has to record 3 exemplar learning designs each year. So we capture about 9,000 learning designs in the 3 years. And so those learning designs prove as a basis for others to start to learn from. So our whole focus is on learning partnerships as opposed to win-lose partnerships, which is, again, the model we have today. TISA is probably an example of that. Sorry, OECD people if you're here, but what it does is it gives you rankings within the context. And so what we don't want to do is do rankings without context.
So any other reflections or questions?
Okay. I'm a colleague to Susan, and I have a question for you, Greg. As I understood, no Swedish school has joined this project yet.
Yeah.
So, do you have the courage of those because I think you got
I didn't pay to do that, did I?
the right structure, the local structure now, and they change how to work with education systems.
Absolutely, and I think one of the key issues is to step out a little bit of the box and try to challenge the system in the political level. And that's what we have done in Upplands Väsby, saying, okay, this is not working. Let's sit together and make a system that we really believe in all political parties. But then, as I told in Swedish in the beginning, it's not my job to be in the classroom and talk about what kind of way of teaching is the best way. I think that's one of the things that you told about Finland, how they are being successful, that the system allows the teachers to make decisions. And actually about the courage, I think Upplands Väsby has proven in other areas that we have a lot of courage. We're not sitting on our hands. And actually it's a vital part of our vision in Upplands Väsby to have courage in making decisions and evaluate and do rather than reflecting. Or I think reflecting is a good part also in our model, but you have have to do first. So we have the courage, I promise.
Eva wanted to comment on
Yes, so I think that in order to sort of build a strong partnership regarding those 1,000 schools who would like to join in the program here in Sweden, Marshall will commit to actually do that, to collaborate and secure that we find those 1,000 schools, and if Perry is starting out as a good mayor of Upplands Väsby, then we are on our way. So this is all about partnering with local governments across Sweden, and it's wonderful. From this seminar, we can say that at least we have one of the 209 local governments with us.
I'll add one comment too. We've built into the model this notion of local partnerships. Partnerships is critical. But I say it's critical for this reason. One is there's been lots of good ideas about change in education. And because education is a charged area, it's about the responsibility for our young people. What can happen very quickly is that you can have an education system or a government with good intent, goodwill, and even making progress, and either business or other governments or community can turn against them. And the reason, we could go, there's a PhD study in that, I'm sure, but what we're suggesting, in fact, we really are pushing, is that each of these 1,000 schools has a strong partnership that represents business, community, political, etc., as a way of protecting and nurturing what happens. And I think that's a critical part. It hasn't happened so much in change. Change needs to be protected and nurtured, particularly in the early stages, and partnerships are a good vehicle to do that.
Annika,
Just to be clear as well, I think that we need to highlight that Upplands Väsby is doing quite a lot of good things already. So one of the things that we're doing excellent is actually participating in the 21st century skills learning design work that we're doing. So there is progression going on, there's good vision in place. However, there are bits and pieces that we need to take one step further. And that's where I see we're going to highlight for the next year.
I was wondering about the reactions of the teachers in general. For some must be extremely threatened, some must be very inspired. What do you see in general? It takes a lot of courage and self-esteem, of course, to change roles. Do we need to shift a lot of, just educate new teachers in order to fix this?
Well, I think one of the elements in our work that's critical, one of our biggest focus from a global partnership and from the local partnerships, is around capacity building. And capacity building at all levels, but particularly in teachers as well. But here's the interesting thing is, and again, I'll steal this line from Michael Ford because he comes up with great lines, but it's like, there's probably only one thing worse than having a class full of 30 children, say, who are all bored, grade 9s, and they're all bored and trying to teach them. Well, the thing worse is being the teacher who's trying to teach them. So for a lot of teachers, the value in this is saying, imagine a situation where kids want to come to the class, they want to learn, where they're engaged, they're motivated, where it's a much better, happier, less disciplined. All of these things we're seeing start to happen. And so there will always be teachers on the leading edge of change and teachers on the lagging edge of change. And what we're trying to do is say, if we can create the right culture, you bring along a whole set of teachers. And some may drop off the end, and that's okay, because it may not be the right setting for them. But you bring along the whole organisation in a cultural change and focus on capacity building of the collective nature rather than the individual nature, then teachers get excited about that.
We need to wrap up. One of the reflections that I made, as Barry was touching on as well, is that Upplands Väsby has made a journey during the past years where we have more or less moved from being a bureaucratic, traditional municipality, basically not paying too much attention to the citizens and to the needs and so on. We had a lot of experts, and the teachers were also the experts in the room. So it is very much a reflection of what you were talking about when it comes to what we need to shift from, so to say. And in fact, the administration of the municipality has shifted in the past 5 or 6 years. It has definitely shifted into a more service-oriented, customer-oriented, need-focused organization. And it's really interesting because what you're saying is very true. If you look at who can deliver the services in a municipality that works in that way. Well, it's certainly not the bureaucrat that's the expert, you know. You need to put on the hat and the smile and say, what can I do for you today? You know, and it's a complete different government, or I really like the English word for public servant, actually, because serving the public is actually, it's the nicest thing you can do. In America, they use it as a swear word, but it's really what we're here to do, to be servants of the public, so to say, and that's perhaps that experience, I think, is very much in line with the description that you do. However, we have not yet done that journey or made that transition in the school system. So maybe that can wrap up the comment. So we need to move on. What I wanted to say, also connected to this, is that there's a seminar following this that has to do with how we relate to the citizens in dialogue and how we involve them in trying to co-create. You were talking about learning partnerships, but we're also talking about co-creation when it comes to systems or solutions that we need in society. And that seminar will actually start here in 10 minutes?
10 minutes.
Yeah. So we need to wrap up. But I want to thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing. That if you want to share the content of the seminar, it will be put on YouTube this afternoon. So if you look for Greg, Butler and Väsby, you will find it.